Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the February meeting of the Education and Learning Committee under these very strange circumstances. I'm sure that Tracy will want to give us some advice in terms of muting microphones and switching off cameras while we're actually in the meeting itself. But can you note that this meeting will be live streamed, recorded, and subsequently made available to the public for viewing purposes. Tracy, is there anything you want to say?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If all members could keep their microphones muted and their cameras switched off unless you're speaking, that would be helpful. And if you wish to speak, please use the chat function and just write the word speak. If you're unable to view the chat, if you just raise your hand, I'll make sure the chat is updated for the Chair. And the Sederent, we've got 23 members present. Not present at the start of the meeting is Councillor Fairbairn and Councillor Tate, Kenny Pullen and Mel McGill. Thanks,
Tracy. And I need to approve the members' remote participation, which I do. Okay, so if we move on to declarations of interest. No? Okay, so into the body of the meeting, item 3 on page 11 is the minute of the meeting of the 3rd November 2020, which is for noting. I'm happy to note that. Okay. So item 4 on page 19. This is the Education Restart Updated Position report by the Director of Skills, Education and Learning. This paper provides a update on the arrangements for our schools since Christmas. It covers remote learning expectations, including information on staying safe online, provides information which was correct at the time of publication regarding SQA, the emergency childcare for key workers, and arrangements for children who require additional support or are considered vulnerable, including provision of meals and a brief financial update. Pupils across Dumfries and Galloway have been learning at home since the 11th of January. Parents are always at the heart of children's learning, but the last few weeks we have relied on this even more. It's been hard for parents, I know, balancing work and supporting children's learning at home. Thank you to all parents and pupils for sticking with this. We hope that we can begin to get back to school very soon. Further announcements were made on Tuesday, and the Director wishes to give a verbal update. Gillian?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Yes, as you say, earlier this week, the First Minister announced the intention to move to a phased return to in-person learning and teaching, using every inch of headroom we have to get children back to school. So we are now planning for a full-time return for nursery and primary 1 to 3 pupils from the 22nd of February, and for a small proportion of senior phase pupils who have to undertake practical work for assessment purposes. I know that we'll have final confirmation of this in 2 weeks' time, but it's important to give as much notice as we can for parents and pupils for the plans ahead. Along with my management team, our head teachers, joint trade unions, public health and our partners across the council, we're making arrangements for the return of pupils and for the staff required. And I know that parents, pupils and staff will have questions around the self-testing kits were expected for staff and senior pupils, and which were also announced just yesterday, and also the practical arrangements for return to schools, which are so critical. The key partners who keep the wheels turning in the background and all the necessary plans for cleaning, janitorial, administration, meals and transport. So we will update our website with all of this, with staff and parent frequently asked questions, and I've committed to write to all parents by next Thursday once these plans are in place. The Chief Executive is meeting with all head teachers along with the corporate management team on the 11th of February, and we'll put the plans in place across the council to support schools returning and to hear what we need to do for the medium to longer term in order to deal with the consequences of the pandemic. Moving on particularly to the announcement related to senior pupils. I know that pupils and parents will have questions over the detail of what is intended for our senior phase pupils to allow the in-school practical work that's necessary for the completion of national qualification courses. Initially, The government intends that there will be no more than around 5 to 8% of a secondary school roll physically present at any one time for these purposes. So it's a small proportion of the senior phase pupils. The secondary head teachers are planning the practical arrangements for this, whilst also providing childcare for key workers and vulnerable children, and also the remote learning for these learners remaining at home. So as you will know, there are a lot of factors to balance, and we will get these timetable blocks for learners out as soon as possible. The most up-to-date clinical guidance was published yesterday, and the secondary heads, Jonathan and I, will take this forward when we meet tomorrow. Government informed me last night of the testing arrangements for staff and senior pupils, and we expect deliveries of these self-testing kits next week. The administration, distribution and recording of these will be the responsibilities of schools, so we have a lot to do. But our head teachers are skilled and experienced leaders, and I know that we can do this together. Bringing our youngest and oldest pupils back to school is such a positive step, and we'll begin to see some light towards the reopening of our school buildings to be physical centres of learning full of energy and positivity. I know that some children will be disappointed that they can't return to school yet, particularly if their brother or sister is going, and I know everyone's keen to see their friends. And as you said, Chair, if we can just hold on a little more. I'm so proud of our young people and how they're sticking with the rules and getting on with their learning as much as they can, and to parents and carers for keeping with us throughout. It has been a very different start to school in 2021. Pupils and teachers are adapting well to remote learning, and we're 3 weeks into the school term. Feedback is positive as teachers and learners continue with education in alternative ways. We're keeping in frequent contact with teachers on the learning provided to make sure it meets the expectations of pupils and parents, and in keeping with the curriculum for excellence. Education Scotland are checking in with different schools across our region to find out more about the learning being provided, how teachers have adapted lessons, and to hear from pupils about how they're getting on with remote learning. Pupils are being provided with regular feedback on the tasks being set, and they've got the chance to speak to teachers about their lessons or any difficulties that they're having. No one's underestimating how challenging it can be for families to be at home during this time, so this positive feedback with regards to the learning has been really positively received. So I know that was a rather long, brief introduction, but there's such a lot happening, Chair, and in addition to the paper, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Gillian. Members, I've got Willie Scobie wanting to speak. Willie?
Thanks, Chair. Jeff. Oh, I'll switch that off just now. Sorry about that, Jeff. Aye, it was pretty long, Gillian, but very informative, and thank you for that. Just on page 35, and I know that the First Minister was on announcing that she's going to try, or she hopes to bring back the schools on the 22nd of February, which I'm sure all parents, indeed many people, will welcome that. But there was also an EIS representative on national news or Scottish news talking about the risk factor. And obviously they are concerned, as we all would be concerned, you know, because as you bring children back, then there will be social mixing, whether we try to avoid it or not, that will happen. And on 3.5 it says teachers are expected to employ online safeguarding guidelines. Is this what you're talking about, Gillian, in terms of the self-testing? Or perhaps the question of the EIS is, are they satisfied? Do you know if they are satisfied with that arrangement and feel confident in returning on the 22nd? I think maybe we'd hear from the EIS on that one. And again on page 22, given we are returning, and I don't know if it's maybe appropriate, but on the last lockdown we had some 500 children using the hubs, and that increased, I think, to some 2,000 plus kids who wanted to. How have we managed that, and did we meet with all the kids, meet the numbers of all the kids who required that facility or the hub, and are there still people out, still kids out there who require this, and we cannot provide it.
Julie?
Thank you, Chair. If I take the points on safeguarding first and foremost, I think there are a number of points regarding health and safety and in terms of online safeguarding. So the statement on paragraph 3.5 was specifically related to online safeguarding, and we're taking that very seriously. Young people are working online, they're working on a range of different types of devices and different platforms. So it's really important that parents, staff and pupils know how to stay safe online. So that aside, we're also it's very important to us that our trade union colleagues, both the EIS and all trade union colleagues, feel that their staff are supported and safe when they go back to school. Now, we have trade union representation here this morning. They may wish to speak for themselves, but certainly we met last night with our joint trade union meeting, and we have an LNCT, which is the teacher trade union. We're meeting them this afternoon. Scottish Government has published clinical guidance again last night with specific reference to 2-metre distancing, which will be required in secondary schools, and to highlight and re-emphasise the importance of physical distancing in schools between staff. It's not changed, that guidance has not changed, but it is re-emphasised that that will be absolutely key to what we are doing in our schools. So the self-testing, again, was announced recently. It is expected that all staff and all senior pupils will be offered the opportunity for self-testing twice per week, and those tests will be delivered to our schools, we estimate, on Monday. I received the information from Scottish Government at 11:30 last night, so we haven't not had a deal of time to interpret that, but we'll be focusing on that with secondary heads tomorrow.
Thanks, Julian. Got quite a few people wanting to speak about this topic.
Chair, the question on the kids, it wasn't answered.
My apologies, Councillor Scobie. Yes, we had 500 children in the hubs last time round. We had over 2,000 applied for the childcare after Christmas. We worked really closely with families to try and reduce the need for the number of people in our schools, and we reduced that by around 700. We are hoping that we are responding to the needs of families. I know it's really not easy, but families have been fantastic in helping us to keep the number of interactions in our schools to an absolute minimum, and helping us to keep the number of adults in our schools to a minimum, because that's what Public Health have asked us to do. So if there are parents or families that are struggling, we are seeing an increase in the number of vulnerable children who are attending school, and a decrease in the number of children who are requesting childcare for key worker support. And I think that that's a positive picture, in that we are making sure we target the children who need us most. But if there are particular cases or particular concerns of families, I ask that they make contact either with their head teacher or directly in using the contact details on the website.
Okay, Willie?
Yeah, thanks for that, Gillian and Jeff.
Okay, so I've got Julie Irvin. Julie?
Thank you, Chair. It was really just to reiterate what Gillian was saying. You know, as a teacher, we cannot wait to get back into the classroom. Online is not ideal for anyone. We are missing the contact with the pupils in our class, with their parents, all the things that go along with it. But the one thing that probably still concerns teachers the most is for those who are vulnerable themselves, or pregnant, or at further risk. And it's really just to reiterate that we need to make sure that those risk assessments and the protection for those staff are very much still in place. I understand, as part of the work everybody's doing together, you know, that's what we're working towards. And I think it's important that everybody is aware of that. But that is probably, as a teacher, where the biggest concerns lie, is for the well-being of our colleagues, those who, as I say, are vulnerable and at risk themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Pauline Drysdale. Pauline?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chair. Morning, Gillian. Thanks very much for your report. The pandemic has been really hard for everyone, but for many children and young people, it has been particularly difficult. unsurprisingly, there are clear signs that the upheaval in children's lives are having an impact on their mental health. I have been having a look at the mental health of children and young people in England report. I know it's English figures, but they picked and tracked more than 3,000 young children, and the results of this report came back to their committee in the autumn last year. And sadly, the latest findings published pointed out that 1 in 6 children aged 5 to 16 had a probable mental health disorder, which is up from 1 in 9 3 years previously, which is obviously something we're going to have to face up to across the UK. But, you know, particularly for our region, I want to make sure that we're ready for this, which I know is a bit alarming. So what I was going to ask Gillian, the Scottish Government has provided a 3.6 million fund for additional counsellors, including one for every secondary school. Do you think we can be assured as councillors that Dumfries and Galloway have responded to this letter? I hope you've received it okay, and that we've applied for this funding. Thanks, Gillian.
Gillian?
Thank you very much. Yes, I think it's the concerns of and anxieties and worries of young people and families are foremost in our minds. I think it's also important to recognise that our young people have been absolutely magnificent throughout this. I don't want this generation to be labelled as the poor COVID generation or Generation C. I think that deficit model is really negative, and we have to celebrate the creativity and resilience and grit and positivity that our young people have shown us too throughout this. They've just been absolutely magnificent. But it's worrying. So we have to recognise that young people are worried, and they need people to talk to, people that they trust, people that they know, and that our counsellors in schools and their teachers in schools and the support staff, and using the resources from our health colleagues and on GLOW, all provide a basket of support for our young people. And if there is money out there from the government, and you can be assured that I will make sure that we apply for it fully. We have got a very proactive youth work service and counsellors in schools providing early intervention, and I think that is also a priority in our children's services plan, which we'll be taking forward next week.
Excellent. Thank you, Gillian. Thank you.
Okay, Pauline. Right. Stephen Thompson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was actually a question on, I suppose, the online experience for young people and staff and parents as well. But you know, a year ago today, we would have been worried about how much screen time people were getting, whereas now it's sort of enforced. So I think in terms of the school day, and it doesn't mention anywhere in the reports we've got to date, but is there a potential risk or something that we need to keep our focus on in the future, where nationally or locally we have some provision to look out for eye health? So I know screen time is maybe something that isn't ideal for all types of learning, but if we're forced to do it, it's always more difficult than it might seem to sort of make sure that people are taking screen breaks, looking after themselves in terms of posture, positioning, and also their eyes. So that sort of lack of change of focus during the school day and being sort of glued to a screen as well, is there a sort of hidden problem that we might sort of have in future, and are we taking any steps locally or nationally to address that, or at least provide assurance that it's not an issue?
Gillian?
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I think that is certainly something internationally. There has been some work done on this, and looking at, you're absolutely right, the screen distance and the lack of long focus. It's certainly something we'll take on, and I know that Susan will pick that up in terms of our virtual desktop work. We are looking at how we give best advice to young people. I'm looking around, I have 7 screens in front of me at the moment, so I think that it is certainly something we need to be aware of for our staff working from home and also for our pupils. But remote learning doesn't always mean just the screen. So I think it is about that balance of activity that we're asking for our pupils to undertake. But it is we are working and learning in very different ways, and we have to make sure that we are keeping an eye on the ergonomics of what we're asking people to do. So I can certainly provide further information to members on any public health advice that we can get regarding eye health, because it is something we need to take account of.
Thanks, Gillian.
Okay, Stephen. Okay, I've got Jim McComb, followed by David Inglis and Karen Carruthers. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. At 3.11, I note the Scottish Government has provided guidance on the definitions of key worker. Where do agricultural workers stand in relation to this definition?
Julie?
Thank you, Councillor McComb. Clearly, our land-based industries are key in Dumfries and Galloway, and we've worked in both in the previous lockdown and in this period that they are considered key workers if they're attending work in person, if they are required to attend work in person. The very significant shifts in the government guidance was that whole workforces or entire groups of staff should not be designated as key workers. So there was a shift to this being more nuanced, that if there were particular workers who are undertaking particular tasks where they had to attend in person, clearly agriculture is a very wide range, some of which may not be, some of which may be more suitable to be working from home. They're not all physically attendance jobs, but that is certainly we have had a lot of work with our employer engagement groups, is what I was looking for. Our employer engagement groups have been working with us to make sure that we provide childcare for those who need it.
So someone who is, for instance, milking cows,
yes,
or feeding animals, would they be regarded as key workers?
If their employer requires them to attend in person or they're self-employed.
Yes.
Yes.
That's quite clear. Thank you.
Okay, Jim. Okay, so David Inglis. David?
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Gillian, and thank you for your report. A couple of questions. On page 20, 3.6, it says the schools are required to monitor levels of pupil engagement. Have we any feedback on that? Do we know just what the level of engagement is with pupils, and how well they're engaging with this remote learning? So that would be my first question. I've also got a question on page 21, 314 regarding the PVI sector. I noticed there are 4 there that says they've closed. I'm presuming that's simply due to its short-term closure.
Yes.
Am I right? So that's simply because they don't get enough pupils in to make it worthwhile opening. So on 315, the Deputy First Minister had indicated there could be 3.8 million available to that sector, and it says we will confirm these details shortly, and are also considering further support to childminders. Have we got an update on that one? Thanks, Gillian.
Yes, thank you. Again, we received further information yesterday regarding the PVI sector, so they continue to be supported, and we have had 4 PVI providers have taken their own business decisions to close over this period, and there are financial supports available to these providers, both through the existing contracts and as local businesses. They would also be entitled to certain grants. And again, it's quite a complex landscape in terms of all the specific grants that are available for local businesses, but I can provide further details on that. The further information came in yesterday, which I've not had a lot of time to interpret, but they're coming in from different aspects of government, so I can provide that information to members. In terms of engagement, I think it's an absolute key picture. I can't say that it is perfect. I'm sure that there will be a range of levels of engagement, but I've asked all head teachers are responsible for working with their children and families to make sure that our families and our young people are engaging with schools. We know that the increase in engagement in online learning, we know that more and more pupils are working through Glow or other platforms, and we're reporting on that level of log on, but that's not the whole picture. So we've got some really, really good examples of how schools are engaging online and through more and other ways of learning. I think it would also be fair to say there are certain year groups who are potentially finding it more difficult to be motivated. We know that certain year groups might be studying subjects that they're not going to take forward into the senior phase. They're not being examined on those subjects, and they may feel that they are less interested in taking forward some of those subjects. So I don't want to pinpoint any particular year group, but you know who you are. And I think it is hard for young people in this environment where they're not sure what their senior phase brings and they're not sure exactly where their options are for next session. But I do ask our young people to try to keep in contact with us and to make sure that they're using all the opportunities they can to keep learning and to keep building the skills and experiences that they're having in their schools. But again, if there are any families who've got concerns, any parents or pupils that have got concerns, to please work with their class teacher and their head teacher in the first instance.
Okay, David.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, I've got Karen Carruthers. Karen.
Morning, Chair. Morning, Gillian.
Morning.
Thank you. Gillian, obviously, it's in regards to children's mental health, and we recognise that children are resilient, that everybody's going through the same experience at this moment in time, albeit they will be very different for each individual child. But I think we have to keep a level of normality, and I think try and feed that to children as well. So, I mean, I would be interested, obviously we'll have a baseline in regards to how many referrals were to the counsellors within the school pre-COVID. So, I mean, it'd be good to monitor that, obviously, as we go through this whole kind of transformation and the way forward, see what the numbers are, but also look at how many have required secondary mental health services, so more serious effects on children. I'd also like to know, are we doing any kind of planned kind of generic sessions with children? Because there may be children that are struggling with how they're feeling, what they're thinking, but sometimes again normalising that makes them realise that, all right, it's okay to think like that. So I often think sometimes, I don't know if it's old-fashioned, the assemblies, I don't know if you still have them, but that kind of area to touch on anxiety, to touch on, it's all right to feel that way, so that it doesn't make it all about, I must be something wrong with me when I'm feeling like this. I think that's really important. And then just another, in regards to the self-testing, have you done any discussion with fellow colleagues like NHS? Obviously, they've been doing self-testing for quite some time. Just in relation to how staff feel about that, what the results are, just to get just to give reassurance maybe to the teachers that are going down this route and pupils. Thank you.
Julian?
Thank you, Councillor. On the first point, I absolutely agree that we need to keep this. This is not all about clinicalising, medicalising some of these feelings, and to really help young people realise this is a global emergency, and it's okay to feel, and it's almost normal to feel worried potentially, or to have questions, and how to express those, what these feelings mean, and how that they can have set elements of self-care. So absolutely that we're prioritising that with our head teachers to make sure that they take every opportunity to talk to young people and to give parents and carers the support they need in order for them to talk to young people, and through family learning and many of our other partners having that same opportunity to talk to young people, and also to monitor those, as you mentioned, who then require more specialist, more clinical, more secondary support. So we don't have baseline figures to hand at the moment, but I think that will be something we will carefully monitor. In terms of working with our health partners, I think that would be really important for us. It's not something I had thought around, so thank you for that. We received the information about the lateral flow testing last night, but of course that's not new for our health service partners. You have been doing it for some time in the NHS, and the experiences and practice of our NHS colleagues will be very welcome, and I know we're working with public health closely in order to get this programme out next week.
Karen, okay.
Thanks. Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you.
Okay. So just checking the chat. I've got no one else looking to speak. So can we move to the recommendations on page 19? Can we note 2.1 and 2.2? And can we agree 2.3? I take it we've agreed. Okay, right.
Thank you.
So moving on to the next item, agenda 5, on page 35, Dumfries Learning Town Phase 2 update and governance arrangements. On the 18th of December, the Scottish Government announced that a replacement for Dumfries High School was included within the funding envelope for Phase 2 of the Learning Estate Investment Programme. This paper details the high-level financial breakdown around the capital requirement for the individual elements of Dumfries Learning Town Phase 2 and accounts for a capital contribution from the existing properties, buildings, schools asset class. Further details around the funding contribution from the Scottish Government will be made available at a future date. The contribution will be in the form of revenue support, requiring the Council to fully fund the capital costs with the revenue support grant provided over 25 years. The paper also expands on the governance and management arrangements to take the programme forward. The final elements of the report informs members of the timeline for the statutory consultation around Lawburn Primary School. And Gillian, who do I have to speak to this?
We have Lauren and Paul McCulloch on the call this morning.
Thanks. Lauren, Paul, is there anything you want to add to the paper?
Thanks, Chair. I think the key thing on the paper, I suppose, is around ensuring that we have the correct governance processes in place as a commitment off the back of this to allow us to move forward, assuming that members are in support of the detail of the paper itself. But Paul and myself are happy to take any questions that members have around the paper, though.
Thanks, Lauren. Members, any questions? Dick Brodie, Richard.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's another the phase 2 is another exciting and innovative improvement for education in Dumfries. One missing from the report is what impact this large capital investment is going to have on the future investment in the school estate across the region. At the previous meeting, I raised the fact that we need to have the same discussion in the east and west of the region as we have had in Dumfries to improve the education for young people, and a report I'm sure is coming at some stage on that. So if there are exciting ideas which come out of these discussions for the rest of the region, can we assure that there will be enough capital available to invest in our kids' future?
Lauren?
Thanks, Chair. It's a good question. I think on the balance, if we look at how the funding allocation through the request is being split apart, there's the 48.1 request for the high school has a level of revenue funding support from the government, and that is in as a strategic project. The refurbishment for the academy and Lawburn Primary School, there's around £23 million in that request. Now that again is dedicated capital request from the council's own funding streams. If those two schools, Lawburn and the Academy, were to sit within the asset class as it sits just now, that would take an incredibly long time, quite a number of years to be able to get to that level of investment. So on the whole, on the balance, there's quite a significant level of improvement and investment within the asset class schools themselves. So that does bring a benefit across the board. One of the previously reported papers was around the transformational agenda for Dumfries and Galloway, and one of those elements is the school's estate modelling. The modelling process within there will allow us to determine what our level of requirement is in terms of numbers of schools, locations, sizes, scale, backed up with information from condition surveys once they're completed, and that will allow us to build a picture of what the school estate should look like across the board, and absolutely every project that we do ourselves internally and in a national forum and internationally, we're looking to build on the lessons learned and the post-occupancy evaluations to make sure we capitalise and benefit from all the good elements of those, and also learn from any mistakes or anything that actually doesn't fit within the environment of Dumfries and Galloway schools.
Want to back in again, Dick?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I don't know if I answered my question or not, but I think it is a major investment. So I think we need to recognise that we need to invest in the east and the west as well, because yeah, we need to we need to move forward to modern times. Are we meeting all our people's needs in the east and west of the region? Should we not be providing facilities there which can actually encourage children who don't have academic qualifications? Perhaps the 30% that are identified late in the report who have some support needs one way or another. Do we need to invest in STEM activities, STEM centres, school centres in the east and the west as part of the education system? I think these are all important ideas, and if we do address these, they will need capital investment in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. I've got David McKee. David?
Hi, thanks, Chair. My big issue is, what effect is this going to have on our budget over the next few years, given that we've got to fund up front and the government will gaze it back over the next 10 years or so? What effect is that going to have us? Will Mr. Brodie's school have to struggle for a wee while? But it's quite concerning that we've got to find this money and it's going to be paid back over 10, 15 years or whatever it was. That's my problem with it. Thanks.
It's 25 years, David. But Lauren?
You just made it worse, Jeff.
It's a good question, and I think that's something that needs considered through the capital investment strategy from the council's perspective. What we know at this point in time is that our finance colleagues have confirmed that this is affordable. That there is the level of borrowing available to be able to meet the ask in the paper. The impact that has on other strategic projects hasn't been determined at this stage. It will mean that the level of borrowing. However, I think coming back to the fact that we have an ageing estate that does require investment, we have to be proactive and take an opportunity where the government provide a level of funding, whether that's through capital or revenue. Revenue has its pluses, also has its negative sides. It does put us in the position as a council where we have to find all of the capital up front, and the impact of that is to the tune of £4 to £8 million for the high school in a number of across 4 to 5 years across the funding part of that. It does bring half of that back in though, so it's difficult to know the impact of that and the balance just now without measuring it up against the capital strategy and the other competing demands on there. I think that's something that will be discussed and floated around the budget setting exercise towards the end of March, and that'll go through full council to measure the impact on that one.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lauren. Ian Carruthers and then Kenny Pullen. Ian?
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, that's fine.
On good now. It's similar to what Councillor McKee's brought up actually. So as you look through the recommendations, you think you are predetermining the budget process to a degree. So just to get some clarity in regards to that, my understanding is that each political group will present a budget at the full council at the appropriate time, and at that point I would have thought some of this information was probably more relevant for there. Fair enough, the education learners should see the machinations, how it's put together and how it will potentially go forward, but ultimately it's too big just for education. It'll have to go to full council, and then it's relevant that Councillor McKee's brought that point up, and it was the same point as myself. So I just want assurances for I suppose the officers through yourself, Chair, that actually this will be considered in full and this is not a predetermination of any future decisions at the council.
Recommendation 2.1 is to agree to make a recommendation to full council.
I see that, Chair. No, thanks. I'm just wanting that absolutely clear. So we are. It's been outlined. It's been raised by one of your own fellow group members as well. I think it's appropriate to raise it within the right forum, but obviously look for that from yourself along with officers, Chair.
Yeah, it's not within the power of this committee to grant the funding for this. Okay, Kenny Pullen.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just looking at Appendix 1 on the client side structure, and there's a couple of vacancies, but one of them is vacancy education specialists. I'm just wondering if we're thinking about making that representation from each of the schools involved in the projects there, or if not, how does each school have representation to that board in terms of the how the projects develop?
Chair, yeah, I'm happy
Paul,
to take that
yep.
question.
Yep, Paul.
So yeah, thanks, Chair. In terms of the way that the projects will be structured, obviously the school and the school community will be key to development of these projects as we move through that development phase. So in terms of creating that sort of team structure, that's the client side structure as required to deliver the projects. However, as part of the development of the designs and indeed the construction process, and as we go through, it'll be critical that each of the schools is fully involved in this process, and not just the schools, there'll be the wider community as well. So it'll be key that we capture all of that as part of the development process.
Okay, Kenny.
Sorry, just to check, so that's written into the procedures then, Paul, that schools have input at certain key strategic decision points, etc., and you know, as well as the layout of the school, just other decisions as well. I'm just keen that each school has an input to that in terms of the strategic side of that, not just where the classrooms go and how many classrooms there are.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the first things we'll need to do is, as we hopefully get approval for this through full council, is that we'll create a project execution plan, and that plan will clearly lay out exactly where each of these component parts of the organisation will sit and what the key decisions will be for each of those.
Thank you.
Okay, Kenny. So I've got Pauline Drysdale and Jim McComb. Pauline?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's good to see you, Lauren. Thank you for your report. I appreciate this is about Dumfries Learning Town, but I just would like to put it on record, if that's acceptable, that much like Councillor Brodie's points, our schools to the west of the region always communicate with ourselves that they feel a bit left out. Now, I know you kindly did a bit of research with Kirkcudbright Academy, which is somewhat, you know, run down at the moment, shall we say. Heating wasn't working and a lot of painting required, etc. And it's just to ask, you know, ensure that, reiterating on Paul McCullough's points, that we will make sure that these schools are included, because I think at the moment they're feeling a bit on the back burner. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline.
Absolutely. I think what's critical moving forward is the current round of school condition surveys. A number of years ago, we had these surveys conducted, and that's what allowed us to ensure we had prioritised investment going to the right places, to the schools that need it the most. And it's been a while since those surveys have been conducted, which is why it's really important to have that finalised and finished off, so we can reassess that priority order, and then we can absolutely guarantee that the investment goes to the schools that need it the most.
Is it, Chair, is it okay if I come back in?
Yes, come in.
Sorry, thank you very much, Chair. That's super, Lauren, but could you just make sure that perhaps we have some sort of timing plan on that? Because I think they feel as if they're just hanging on, and they just don't have a timeline for that. And it can be a little bit depressing for some of these more rural schools. I'd really appreciate that if that was possible. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. What will actually happen is we will use the evidence from the condition surveys along with a few other key hooks into where the investment needs to be, and we'll bring that back to this committee to readdress and reorder the priority order, and off the back of that we'll have our 3-year capital investment plan and our 10-year capital investment plan to show the running order of where investment will go in the schools.
Okay, thank you, Lauren.
Okay, fine. Okay, Jim McComb. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. I note that there's been reference to the Scottish Futures Trust. What role does the South West Hub play in relation to these proposals?
Paul?
Thanks, Councillor, and thanks, Chair. So with regards to the way that we'll undertake these projects, the committee paper outlines that we'll have to create a contract strategy, and that contract strategy will look at the various forms of procurement, and will recommend a procurement route for both the high school and replacement, and also for the refurbishment of the academy, the moving of Lorburn Primary. So We've not quite reached that stage yet. Now, with regards to the Scottish Futures Trust, there is dialogue between colleagues at Scottish Government and the Council regarding this whole project and project approval. Scottish Futures Trust guidance is made reference to with regards to making sure you've got the correct project set up, and that's what we're trying to articulate here in the first appendix. With regards to Hub South West, there has been no decision taken yet as to how we will procure, I suppose in particular, the new high school, because that's a brand new building. But one of the routes that will be considered as part of that will be the hub procurement route. Now, in reviewing that procurement route, we'll make sure that obviously we look at the lessons that have been learned from the issues we had at the Northwest Campus, and obviously we'll reflect that in the contract strategy.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
Okay. And Ian Crothers, Ian?
Thanks, yeah. Just the officers were about to reply when you went on to somebody else earlier with the question that I asked, just if we get that answered, please.
What was the question?
Yes, could you outline the process in regards to the procedures that this, where it is, the status is now education and learning, and where it goes on to full council through the budget process?
Chair, can I come in there?
Yeah, Paul.
So obviously this report is before the Education and Learning Committee, and the recommendation is that obviously that this has to go to full council for further consideration, and it will only be at that stage should it be agreed that the projects would move forward. So this is the first step in that process. So Ian's point is right. You know, this is not approval of the project. This is us advising the Education and Learning Committee as to next steps, and it'll be only at that stage, further down the line, that the projects would be approved, and quite importantly, would be considered against all the other competing projects that the council has.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. That's a perfect answer.
Okay. So I don't seem to have anybody else looking to speak. So can we go to the recommendations on page 35? Can we agree 2.1 that they make a recommendation to full council for the capital funding? Can we note 2.2 and 2.3? Can we agree 2.4?
Agreed.
And agree 2.5? Can we note 2.6, the timeline? And agree 2.7 that future reports will go, and the consultation process will be brought to the members in separate papers. Everyone happy with that?
Yep.
Okay. So if we move on to item 6 on page 49. Properties, Buildings, Schools Asset Class Update. The report provides members with an update on the capital spend position to the end of December 2020 across the schools asset class and 1140 hours capital funding. Previously, members were informed of the impact COVID-19 had made on the spend profile, and this has been further reviewed with the additional underspend highlighted within the body of the report. Newton Primary School is also highlighted to members to inform them of the delay in start time, which has resulted in capital spend moving across financial year. So I think we've got Lauren to speak to this. Is there anything you want to add, Lauren?
Thanks, Chair. Nothing to add at this stage, but happy to answer any questions on the paper.
Before we start, I've just been passed a note. David McKee, can you stop sharing your screen? It's causing problems.
Would you like to explain what I'm doing?
I think it's the button. It's the button next to the leave button on the top. The one with the up arrow.
An X on that, aye. Okay. Is that what you want?
Yep, I think that's it.
Okay.
Well done.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so members bearing in mind if you want to ask anything about a particular school, generally do so out with the meeting. Okay, I've got Willie Scobie. Willie?
You come in with that guidance before. Just I was going to ask the question. I'll refer to, I'll refrain from making a particular on a school, but I just want to ask Lauren, given COVID has held back construction works, although construction workers are allowed to go and work just now, will those that were on the list be fulfilled by the end of the financial year, and will it be, that would be my question. Will we get them done before the end of March? The schools that were already on the list and were due for renovation or whatever.
Lauren, I doubt it, but
I think actually what the important information on this is, no project will see no funding. The projects will roll on. The timescales have moved, but the commitment is still there for every project that's in the asset class that sees funding just now and sees improvement works. That will still happen. It's just that the timescale will push it on. The funding and our projects don't always align to the end or start of financial years. Quite a few of them bridge financial years. So in smaller scale projects, we may have seen 3, 4, 5, 6 months delay. Larger scale projects might be the same as well. I think the critical part is, Councillor Scobie, that if there are any schools that you're concerned over, I can guarantee that the level of investment and the work that was originally detailed will still happen at those schools. It won't be deleted because of a time gap or a time pause. We carry the full amount of funding that we have allocated to the asset class over for future years, and we'll catch up on all of the projects across next financial year and possibly the one after.
Okay, Willie?
Yeah, Jeff, so the swap will be done, so I'm happy to go with that.
Yeah, it's slippage rather than anything else. Don't appear to have anyone else wishing to speak. So can we move to the recommendations on page 49? Can we note 2.1 and 2.2 of the financial variance at Newton Primary School? Noted. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 7, investment in schools virtual desktop technology, which starts on page 55. As a standing item for this committee, this paper provides an update on the progress to date on the preliminary aspects of this project. Some of this work has been put on hold or delayed as a result of the lockdown and minimising access to school buildings. The paper contains appendices that provide further details for members, including a policy development template for member consideration as part of the budget setting process. And we have Susan Martin and Graham McLaurin to speak to this. Susan and Graham, is there anything you wish to add?
Thank you, Chair. If I may provide members with a wee bit of an update, because it's been a couple of weeks since the paper was written, and there's some quite fast moving developments, so just so that you have the latest information. The first thing is that the member seminar referenced at 3.5 in the paper, it's to confirm to members that we're aiming to hold this prior to the March committee, and I'm currently just getting the invitations and everything finalised to come out to members for that, and aiming to reiterate hold that before the Education and Learning Committee in March. So that's a bit of an update there. The bandwidth upgrades at 3.6, 3.7 and Appendix 1A and 1B, just to update on progress, we now have the first 20 schools in the Rural Gigabit project confirmed to transition to their upgraded bandwidth by the end of February. So that'll be 20 completed by the end of February, leaving 15 due to complete by the end of March. In addition, from the orders placed for all of our other schools, 42 of the 67 have been identified as quick wins by the contractors, and we await the schedule of site visits from Capita in order to complete the necessary speed testing before and after upgrade. So that's sounding very positive. We're just needing dates for that. And finally, the scoping and scheduling is underway for the remaining 25, where more substantial work is required to be able to deliver the increased bandwidth. On the primary mobile learning network at paragraph 3.9, the installation work has now been started by the facilities team. They are trying to work within the confines of the access to buildings that we're trying to impose at the moment to minimise contacts in schools, but they're working through that and started that installation for us. On paragraph 3.11, we had a couple of issues that I highlighted to committee, and by way of update, we now have a preferred solution for printing agreed with BTS colleagues, which is being progressed, and we have some other options held in reserve should they be required, but we're fairly confident with the preferred option. And the issues around YouTube have a solution in place, and testing's underway over the course of this week and next week to finalise that. So both of those issues are now resolved. On the digital devices referenced at 3.13, we now have 3,080 devices have been distributed to families in need, and further orders have been placed. We've currently got a waiting list for tablets for 70 younger primary pupils, but they're expected into stock hopefully by the end of this week, but certainly very early next week, and they'll go straight out to those families. Obviously, with the return to school, that's more imminent, but actually the devices will still support those young people in access and learning as well, so they will still go out. There's no change to that. And finally, Appendix 4, the policy development funding template, in terms of the impact assessment, I would like to note for committee that whilst the project aims to provide greater flexibility in access to digital tools in support of learning, that digital will not be the only tool. So although we will see a more flexible approach, we shouldn't see a huge increase in the approach. Obviously, we're in a position right now where there's much more online learning, but as our schools return, we shouldn't be seeing an increased amount of screen time. I think we referenced it earlier, and actually staff are particularly aware of supporting young people's health and well-being, and making sure that some of the interaction with the screen is simply to pick up instructions that are for tasks that are not screen-orientated tasks. I think that it's important to note, however, that the funding will contribute significantly to the equity and excellence agenda in Dumfries and Galloway, and together with the devices provided to families in recent months, it truly opens up the access to the curriculum for all learners that we are hoping this project would deliver, and I think that's looking more and more positive. And I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm sure Graham is as well. He'll help me with anything technical if members have any questions, Chair.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, we do seem to be making good progress on your update. Thanks very much for that. So, members like to speak. I've got Jim Dempster and Tracy Little. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Susan will have covered much of it anyway in a preamble. In 312, it talks about the delay to the pilot schemes, and that's really what I want to talk about. In Appendix 3, I think it's the first section, it talks about identify schools, and Galloway Primary School is confirmed and Sanker Primary School is to be decided, or whatever the acronym is. Anne Hartness agreed with me, beginning in November last year, that this would be a joint pilot because they're a cluster. There are lots of different reasons why they should work together. They both feed to a single academy. So I'm keen to understand why it's still presented as to be confirmed when it was agreed 3 months ago that it would be a joint pilot with Galloway. The other thing is, identify the spec of devices, and I might need to do this offline, but keen to understand when that will be, simply because, and it's I suppose information for members, the Upper Nithsdale community have got together and put £50,000 into Galloway and Sanker Primary School, in addition to the investment by the school and the government for electronic devices, and it'd be interesting to learn if and when these devices can be configured to suit the school, and when the school might be able to determine what devices they might need. So this is in addition to whatever else the Education Department is doing to support some of the more deprived pupils in our area. So I maybe need to discuss it with Susan offline, but if there's anything you can do to give me some information, Susan, that'd be welcome.
Okay, Susan.
Certainly, thank you. So the SANC are on the appendix, that the appendices were prepared quite far ago, and I know that you had an early conversation, but it was about confirmation with the school, and we wanted to have that final conversation between the primary school, the secondary school and Kellohome, which is why it was still to be confirmed on that paper, and that should have been updated before it came to you, but I can assure you that the 3 schools are going forward as a cluster, so that hopefully offers that reassurance. And in terms of the devices, yes, I would welcome a conversation offline, because we can help with making sure that what is actually compatible with what we're doing, because we would want to maximise that spend. That's a significant investment from the community, and we would want to make sure we're maximising it. So I'll pick that up offline with you, Councillor Dempster, to make sure that we get that right.
With your indulgence, Chair, thanks very much, Susan. It would always be directed to the school for the school to decide anyway. I was just keen to understand when that would happen, but offline would be brilliant, and thanks very much, Chair.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, thanks, Susan. I've got Tracy Little, Kenny Pullen and Pauline Drysdale there. Tracy?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for those updates, Susan. That was really helpful. My question is on 3.13. It was about the digital devices. It says on 3.14, all children and young people from primary success test in receipt of free school meals have received a laptop. Is there a mechanism for people who are not receiving free school meals? Because you'll be aware, I mean, we're all aware of families who are not anywhere, sometimes not even anywhere near that level, but we don't know what their outlays are, their family outlays are, and are struggling but don't want to ask. Is there some form of mechanism for that to happen for them?
Yes, so what we've done in that scenario, the free school meals were certainly very easy to identify and to target, and that was prioritised. However, head teachers were all asked to also flag to us any families where they felt that they would benefit from having a device at home, and families have been asked, if they haven't been contacted by their head teacher but have a problem with accessing devices, to contact their head teacher, and they've come in. And that's been the difference between the numbers in the report, where it was 2,390 laptops had gone out, and we've now got almost another 500 have gone out since then, and that's to families where they've contacted either us directly within the Education Department or via their school to say, look, I could do with some help. I would really appreciate a device that would allow my young people, my children, to access the curriculum. And so they've been addressed on an ad hoc basis, and wherever somebody has come forward with a need, they have been provided with a device. We're also looking at, on that, we're looking at trying to maximise what's available for young people, and so we're looking at a wee pilot with a couple of senior phase pupils to help us to use their keyboards and mouse connected to gaming platforms, so Xboxes, PlayStations, the like, because that gives them the internet access, and with the keyboard and the mouse it essentially turns it into a computer, which then means that for what is a much smaller outlay, that actually the young people can access appropriately the devices and maximise that. So we're working with, we're trying to just keep coming up with options to try and maximise how young people can access online as easily as possible.
Okay, Tracy.
Yeah, that's great, thanks. It's just really good to know that it's not always completely means tested, because sometimes people have difficulties that we're not really aware of. So, oh, that's great.
Okay, so I got Kenny Pullen, Pauline Drysdale, Doug Fairbairn, Stephen Thompson. So, and Gail's just gone. Kenny.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Susan.
Hi.
I'm referring to Appendix 2 in the test script, which I do welcome the inclusion of as a teacher, and I see the number of things that are being tested in advance. Can I just ask about load testing, Susan? Because I do remember, I think we all do about a year and a half ago, obviously the Windows 10 rollout, and the number of teachers logging on at one time seemed to be the root of a lot of issues on day one. So have we done load testing? Are we planning to do load testing both for the number of concurrent users drawing on that server, as well as having those users having multiple applications open? Because teachers will have, they don't just open CMIS and close it, and then open Chrome and close it. They'll have CMIS, Chrome, VLC, Active Inspire, Teams, Office apps. They'll have them all running at the same time. Do we have the capacity this time for the load on all the infrastructure to make sure that it's not going to cause any horrific bottlenecks anywhere?
Yeah, so Graham can come in and help with the technical here possibly, but we did do load testing last summer as part of the very initial proof of concept, and that load testing was positive, and that was positive on our current bandwidth. And what we will have by the time we go live with VDI is the increased bandwidth in every school, and so the virtual desktop will not be rolled out in any school until the bandwidth has been upgraded, in order to offer us further reassurance that that is not going to be a problem. Unfortunately, with schools having closed again since Christmas, it's conspired a wee bit against us, because we had a member of the working group, a class teacher, who was going to do us a full class test with actually teaching using the test environment in order to just test that resilience and test that engagement and interaction. We've not been able to do that, obviously, because they're not in school at the moment, but we are still intending to run that as soon as we are able. And we are also looking at some further load testing of sites before and after bandwidth upgrades. So it is being monitored very carefully to ensure that we don't fall into any of the same traps that we did previously.
That was essentially what I was looking for. So we're far more prepared for, or we're less likely to have 2,000 people logging on at 8:30 on day one and it all falling down.
Yeah, I mean, if you take your school, for example, it will have 5 times the bandwidth it has at the moment to cope with those logons. So we are confident that won't be an issue.
Great news, thank you.
Thanks, Susan. That's very reassuring. So Pauline Drysdale.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Susan. Thank you very much for your report. I'm not the most technically minded person, and I'm just a little bit confused and wondered if you could explain to myself and the rest of the committee on page 59. It's just a confusion reading this report, and it's possibly just me, but the difference between rural GB project primary upgrade, site included with associated secondary upgrade, and already 500 megabytes, and then further down, Susan, sorry, when we go, apologies, we go into the next report, and the far left hand side looks at some of the primary schools haven't had any primary bandwidth upgrade. Does that mean that they've already got on the right hand side rural GB project? It's just a little bit confusing, and it's possibly just me, but if you could explain it, then at least I have knowledge of all of the schools in the region. Thank you.
No problem. So I apologise if that's not clear. So yes, we have a number of competing, not competing, they're all good news, but we've got a number of different projects. It's been split up into different projects, if you like, in order to increase our bandwidth in schools. So the group down the left hand side, starting on that appendix from Applegarth through to Trequia in primary schools, those 54 primary schools, some of those are amongst the 32 that I gave in my verbal update that are quick wins. But what I don't have yet is I don't have a time schedule to be able to put some of that detail into this report. I will have that for you for the next committee, so that will definitely be updated. On the right hand side, the Rural Gigabit project is a nationally funded, Westminster funded project that is looking at increasing bandwidth in rural communities, and we have been able to access that funding and therefore reduce the funding that council needed to put forward for the 35 schools on that side of the chart. And I've kept that slightly separate because that's not the funding that I'm tracking, if you like. That's separate funding, but we are tracking that progress, because clearly that's 35 of our schools who will have an upgraded bandwidth by the time we get to the end of February and then the end of March. And then further down on the page, the secondary bandwidth upgrades, these are the standalone secondary schools who are to have an upgrade. And they also, some of them form part of the 32 that are quick wins, and therefore they'll be updated by the next committee. And the final set are the secondary and on-site primaries, and they also fall into that same category. It's just that we've separated them out so that we know whether we're dealing with primaries or secondaries and what added complications that brings to the planning. So it's to do with the way that we've separated them, really. But everything down the left side of that page are the ones that we're paying for and are part of the project. So we've got 32 of them that are quick wins, and the rest that the planning is already underway to see how we can move them forward.
That's clearer. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay. I've got Doug Fairbairn, Stephen Thompson and Gail McGregor. Doug?
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Susan. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
That's good. I'm having problems this end, and I can't blame David McKay anymore, unfortunately. No, it's a quick fix, really. I think you touched on it with Pauline. It was really to do with teachers and how they deliver lessons, because I know in relation to some areas in my ward, some of the teachers I think are a bit reluctant to deliver in relation to through Teams. So I just wondered if there was any particular training package that you put forward in relation to teaching staff and how they can project a clear learning path for the individuals. I know a lot of them are doing it. The other question is, I think Tracy picked up on it, was the connectivity. I know I've got a very rural ward, and I think there is issues with some kids not getting connectivity in some areas. And I think that some schools have put out surveys in relation to how they're doing educationally wise and how their lessons are and how their internet connections are. So I don't know if that's something you're pursuing more so now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. If I can deal with the Teams question first of all, I think when we've gone into this round of lockdown, we've been much more prepared than we were last time around. There's no doubt about that. And that's very much reflected in the online experiences that we are hearing young people are having. It's a much better experience this time around. We did make available quite a bit of training last year during lockdown, early phase of lockdown, sort of early April, once the holiday period was over, and into May, April and into May, and drop-in sessions for staff, as well as the opportunity for individual schools to do some sort of collegiate development with their own staff groups. These are pretty much always webinars, and that means that staff can go back into them at any time, because quite often you don't use a piece of functionality, you forget how it worked. If you can go back to the webinar and refresh your memory, then you can be up and running again. And one of the things that we're planning to do, so short term, hopefully that is addressing, or there are mechanisms to address where staff are not still feeling confident. But moving forward into the virtual desktop, we intend to roll out the Microsoft Investors in Education badges that provide a massive range of training opportunities for staff in all Microsoft products. And we are working with the working group at the moment to try and specify which of these might be a sort of phase one and what might be core and what we might be asking all staff to complete within a set time frame in order to help build their digital skills to be able to use the technology that we're investing in. And in terms of the connectivity, I think it's a real challenge trying to get it right and trying to get to everybody and trying to make sure that folks have what they need. We can still help provide Wi-Fi access for families too. So in some of the more rural areas where connection, digital connection is a real problem, we're working with Vodafone. We've got a new MiFi box that we're able to provide, and it's an unlimited box. It's a better option for families, and the connectivity using that is pretty solid. However, if we need to look at an alternative, we can do that with families if there are connection issues specific to rurality. So again, I would urge, if you're hearing that in your community, please ask families to speak with their head teachers in the first instance, and that will come back to us, and we'll do everything we can to support families so that they can access their learning.
Thanks, Susan. Doug? Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. I've got Stephen Thompson, Gail McGregor, Woody Scobie and Julie Irving. So, Stephen?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And it's just to follow on the back of Councillor Fairbairn's point, the answer you were given about the MiFi, boxes. In the report, it talks about the 161 access devices in 3.13, and as Councillor Fairbairn's touched on, sometimes it's the rurality, particularly Annandale North, some of the parts that just don't get the coverage. So it's not really a free school meals issue, it's just a digital connectivity issue.
Yeah.
And obviously you're saying the first port of call there is to contact the head teachers directly, which I think we're trying to do through parent councils and community councils, but I think some schools may think, well, we've actually used up all our devices, so how much extra supply do we have, and are they ready to get distributed now?
So we do have some supply, and we've just received further funding, so we're about to purchase more so that we have a stock of them. I think if there's a challenge getting that through to us, I'm happy for members to message into the Education ICT mailbox, and we can pick that up on behalf of families directly, because the aim here is to make this as easy as possible for families, and if we can help where there's connection problems, we're more than happy to do that.
That's great, thanks Susan.
Okay, so Gail McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. I think most of the points that I had have been covered. Tracy picked up on the eligibility and Stephen's just touched on another couple. I appreciate the update on digital inclusion. Where do you feel the gaps are still sitting? Because as you say, that there is additional funding coming forward now, and I think it's being applied with a bit more flexibility than some of the funding we've had previously. So I suppose it's looking at how we deploy that to ensure that kids that perhaps are not eligible through FSM or otherwise are getting what's required. So I suppose it's maybe an understanding of where we feel the gaps are now, and where we feel we need to be sort of blocking those gaps. And page 68, appendix 3, it's got some dates, but it doesn't have any status, so we're not seeing a red, amber, green, which I think would have been useful just to see. And I think the last 3 boxes don't have dates in there for target. Now I appreciate that, I think it's April 21, but if we could maybe get an update on the progress of that and where the status of that particular table is sitting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gail.
Thank you. So in terms of gaps, we've done a wee bit of analysis on where devices have been requested so far. Obviously, we knew the target for the free school meals families, but we've also done a wee bit of analysis of where else device requests are coming from, and tried to look to see where we think there may be gaps. We've written out about 3 weeks ago, maybe now, to our head teachers secondary, because we're not seeing significant numbers of senior phase pupils asking for devices. And obviously with their curriculum being delivered online and their assessments coming up towards the end of the year, we want to make sure they're not trying to access that on a phone. And so I think sometimes folks have said they've got a device because they have a phone, but actually that's not the best device. So we've asked head teachers to try and revisit that with their young people, and asking staff if they're aware that young people are joining Teams meetings, for example, using phones, to try and flag that back to us, and we'll try and support those senior phase pupils. We think there's a bit of a gap there, and we think it's because of the phone issue. Other than that, we know that I am sitting, I think I updated earlier, I'm sitting with a waiting list for 70 devices for lower primary, so that's a bit of a gap at the moment, but that hopefully will fill most of that. And I think it's just a case of raising the profile and making families feel that it's okay to come forward and ask for a device. That's what they're there for, and that's how to get them. So we're just trying to work with communities groups, and I've linked in with the Communities Directorate through Kirsty Peden to pick up on the Connecting Scotland programme and how we can dovetail together to make sure that we're getting devices to the right places. So I think that's about communications really, and keeping that channel open. And in terms of the Appendix 3, we've been a wee bit stalled, I'm afraid, in terms of taking that forward as a result of the schools being closed at the moment. And obviously, in order to get that engagement from schools that I'm keen to get, we haven't been able to take that forward. I've got focuses elsewhere, obviously, just now. So what I haven't done there is I haven't updated that. However, I have asked that that piece of work is prioritised during the month of February. Unfortunately, we're going to have a return to school in the middle of that, but nevertheless, we need to move forward with it. So we're going to prioritise that, and I will have much more information about that pilot project for committee at the next meeting.
That's great. Yeah, I think it's really important to go back, particularly to secondary pupils, and not just ask if they have a device, but what device they're using. And some of them will find any way to get out of it, doing some work anyway, probably. Just one final question that's just popped into my head. I presume that devices that are being given to families that require them, it's per child, not per household. Because if there's multiple kids in a household, I think that's the complication of them scrambling for devices. And how do we help them with bandwidth if they have 2 or 3 kids all on the same system? I know what my house is like when the kids are all home and on the system.
Yeah. So initially we did say, so the families in receipt of free school meals, we did give a maximum of 2 because we wanted to try and get as much coverage into households as possible. However, that has since been revisited, and we've been giving out further devices to those families where there are more than 2 children. So that has been caught back up, and in the exact same vein, you're quite right, where we're giving a 3rd or a 4th device out, we're also asking about connectivity, because that's potentially going to be a problem within the household, and we're looking at offering that as well. So we're picking those up, hopefully.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Gail. So I've got Willie Scobie, Julie Irvine, Jim McComb, and then we'll move to the recommendations. So, Willie?
Mine is more a request of Susan and Graham rather than a question. Susan, I'm looking at it, it's more from a member point of view and what you refer to digital inclusion. Parent councils normally work on Zoom. And as far as we've been advised, Zoom is debarred for our equipment and there's no security. Is there any way between you and Graham and Castipeden that the head teachers or someone in the school can move on to Teams meetings as we are doing here? Know that I'm a great advocate for this way of meeting, and hopefully we'll get back to the normal of meeting face to face. But is there any way you can encourage schools, head teachers, to go on to Teams, and then all members can join in? Because I've only used the council equipment, and I think we are debarred because of this security.
Yeah, certainly we can do that, and I think what we can do is we can work with Mel through the Parent Council forum and try and get a sort of agreed way of working, or at least that option out there for parent councils that they can use Teams as well, and that their head teachers are getting those set up. So absolutely, we can get information out, Councillor Scobie.
Thanks, Susan. That's great. If you could.
Thanks, Susan. Julie Irvine.
Okay, thank you, Chair. It was really just to pick up on a comment that was made earlier. It was a question to Susan where a councillor had asked about teachers and the delivery of lessons and training. And I really just want you all to be aware that not every teacher has digital equipment at home. This is a bit of a national gripe, because teachers, when we start working for an employer, are not given automatically equipment or devices to use at home. So those of us who are doing our online lessons at home are doing so on our own devices. So it's just to make everybody aware of that. It's not as easy as it sounds to have everybody online. If we had been given devices, it makes it a whole lot easier. So we are kind of limited. We also, some of us have children at home. And again, Susan, you know, we've got children who are accessing Teams. I've got 2 currently sitting downstairs on their laptops. I'm on up at my computer. I've had to go and buy a webcam because I didn't own one. I've had to get a set of speakers. So I think it's really just for you all to be aware that we are, as teachers, we're doing the best we can, but we don't always have the equipment to hand or at home. Thank you.
Julie. Okay. I think that's been noted. Jim McComb. Jim.
Thanks, Chair. Susan, is there any evidence that regular use of cleaning fluids is damaging in school equipment, particularly keyboards and monitors?
We have, Councillor McComb, we have had some instances when the wipes first came out into schools in order to wipe desks and wipe down equipment. They were quite, especially as you got near the end of the tube, they were quite wet, and therefore we were wiping devices with really quite wet, dripping wet wipes, and that has caused us problems. All of those, as far as I'm aware, unless you're going to tell me different, all of those have been resolved, and either keyboards have been replaced or screens have been replaced, or whatever needed to happen to get those devices replaced, that has been resolved. And we've worked with the schools with some laminated help sheets to say, please don't use the really wet wipes, so that we can try and avoid that happening. So it has happened, but I believe you're saying that practice has improved. Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's an awareness. I think in the early days we maybe weren't as aware of what we were actually doing and what problems it may cause. So there's a better awareness now, and folks are aware of how to wipe and clean appropriately that isn't then damaging the devices. Thank you. Thank you.
Jim, thanks, Susan. So I've got two late arrivals there, Karen Crothers and then Doug Fairbairn. Then we'll go to the recommendations. So Karen.
Thank you, Chair, and sorry for coming in when you were trying to round things up. It was really just in the back of what Julie said. I think this is a valid point. I was quite surprised, but I did have a meeting with Gillian Bryson, and she did bring up this point that the priority was for IT equipment to be provided to children. However, not all teachers had been provided with IT equipment, which I think is quite incredible, because I don't know how they're supposed to deliver lessons if they haven't actually got the correct equipment. One of the things was that there was extra money coming down from Scottish Government, and one of the questions was going to be, could that money be spent on providing teachers who don't have equipment with equipment? Because I think it's essential. I work with NHS, and we have got we've been provided with iPads and such like to be able to work from home. So I do think that it's a key point what Julie said.
Susan.
Yep. So the new tranche of funding from Scottish Government that you're referring to, Councillor Carruthers, is just the paperwork has just come in for that yesterday as well. And so I need to work through that fine detail to get, there is definitely more flexibility in that funding, but I need to work through that detail to see what the restrictions are or are not on that funding, so that we can maximise its potential and make use of it. And we'll certainly look at that as an option for some of that funding moving forward. I would also say to members that as part of the virtual desktop, and I know that this isn't the solution now, but as part of the virtual desktop move, we will then have an environment where every teacher has their own device, so to speak, that they have in the classroom and they take with them wherever they are going, and that will be a device that they can then use at home as well. And the virtual desktop will mean that there's no issues between working between school and working between home, which is one of the major factors we've got to try and manage at the moment.
Thank you, Susan. And I think this is quite important, because we don't know what the future brings. We don't know, because obviously we're starting that schools are going back. However, we could find ourselves at the end of the year going back down restrictions. We just don't know. So I do think that it would be good to make sure that if that does happen, we're equipped.
Yes.
Thank you.
And certainly, as I say, the infrastructure changes that will come as part of the virtual desktop will absolutely make that possible in a way that it hasn't been possible previously. So another sort of positive side benefit of the work we're trying to do.
And it is a learning curve, just kind of
absolutely
put on all of us. No, thank you.
You've just depressed everyone there, Karen, with the further lockdown.
Sorry, I don't know anything that nobody else knows.
Okay, thanks. Okay, and finally, Doug Fairbairn.
Thank you, Chair. I think Karen's kind of summed it up really, Susan. And Julie, I thank her for bringing that point up that I touched on earlier on in relation to training. Yeah, I find it incredible. And I mean, how much pushing have we actually been doing in relation to the Scottish Government, Susan?
Oh, sorry. So through our professional organisations, through ADES, there's been various lobbying going on, and I know that Julie will be able to update, but there are there's lobbying going on from all trade unions at a national level as well. So through all of the organisations, it is being taken forward through the SERG group at government. And as I say, I haven't had time to digest the detail in that paper yesterday, so I'll be able to look at that and see whether that offers us anything short term. But the sort of positive news for the future is the VDI will help us with that.
Okay, Doug.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Okay, so if we move to the recommendations on page 55, can we note 2.1, note 2.2, and agree 2.3?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 8, Education and Learning Revenue Budget Monitoring Report for the period ended 31st of December 2020. This report provides members with an overview of the key budget monitoring issues and the projected performance against budget for the current financial year for education and learning services based on the position as at 31st of December 2020. Based on the position as at the end of December 2020, excluding the additional costs in relation to COVID-19 response and recovery, it is projected that education and learning services will return to break-even position. And we have, I assume, Colin Pentland to speak to this.
Yes, Chair, I'm here.
Is there anything you want to add, Colin?
Nothing specific, Chair. I suppose the only thing I'd obviously mention is the paper was done at the point in time, and over the last couple of days, as Susan and Gillian and Bryson has alluded to, we are getting more updates on the impact of the update of the schools phasing back and the money we're getting in just now. We're working through plans, obviously, how to maximise that money to best utilise the resources we've got over the coming weeks, I would say, Chair.
Okay. Thanks, Colin. Members? No. In that case, can we move the recommendations on page?
Chair, sorry, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Willie. Go on, Willie.
My apologies. Yeah, obviously, and I'll remain consistent on this one. I think we are in catch-up in terms of additional support needs. In that only a couple of years ago we took out £700,000 and only returned 340. And I think in that respect we are on catch-up. But I think in 3.3, and it is about getting it right for every child, and irrespective of this difficulty or profound disability, then I think we should be really concentrating on getting it right for every child. But on 3.4, I know the number of people who have been consulted on our programme as laid out, that we don't seem to consult with the parents, or I hope I've got that wrong, and maybe Gillian can say, but I think we should be consulting with the parents in terms of our programme and rollout. The other point I would make, Chair, is that with the lockdown, and Gillian referred to earlier in terms of our children.
Sorry, Willie, we're on item 8.
8.
The finance report.
Yeah, and there's reference to support for learners review and so forth.
Where's that?
My apologies, Chair. Yeah, I've turned too many pages. I'll come back in my points. Apologies, Chair.
Okay, Willie. So return to item 8. Can we move to the recommendations? Can we note 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4? Okay. Right. Thanks, Colin.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Now moving to agenda item 9, supporting learners delivering transformation. This report highlights the National Additional Support for Learning Review and the Joint COSLA Scottish Government Action Plan. The action plan was published in October 2020 in response to the National Review. The review and action plan mirror the drivers for the local transformation programme for the Supporting Learners Service. The report also sets out an ambitious timescale for the local implementation of the second phase of transformation, the provision of additional support for children and young people in Dumfries and Galloway. I appreciate there's two very long and detailed and very interesting appendices to this, so I thought it might be useful if Hugh Smith gave us a sort of overview of what's intended to be achieved from this. So, Hugh, are you there?
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah,
yes.
Fine.
Okay. So I suppose really the key message really is the scope of transformation for supporting learners. I think has really has stretched significantly with the Angela Morgan's review earlier last year, and then the action plan that's been produced by the Scottish Government alongside COSLA. I suppose in terms of a quick review of a summary of those documents, fundamentally the acknowledgement is that actually that all our children are responsibilities of all of us, and particularly those children, and that 32% of children that have an identified additional support need, actually that they're responsibilities for all. And I suppose that I would hope that some of the messages that at previous committees that we've been able to share has been about how we bring everybody together to focus on supporting these children from the classroom through to very specialist provision. So I suppose it is fundamentally an acknowledgement that to a degree that the additional supports has been a bit of a Cinderella service, I think, across Scotland, and actually that we need to make a fundamental shift in how we understand and prioritise the needs of those children and young people with additional supports. So it is about a refocus on curriculum. It's about development and capacity building for all staff working with young people. It's about reframing I suppose our expectations and our ambitions for young people. It's a significant shift. And I think that really the last 3 months with Jim in post has highlighted for us that actually this is a total directorate shift and a school shift, not simply supporting learners. So I suppose previously I've probably come to members and asked and presented reports on much of a narrow focus on what we can do in supporting learners. And I think really that this is the step change which says this is about how we all do our business and do it differently. Thanks, Hugh. I know that Jim is very keen on driving this forward as rapidly as possible, recognising what we need to do. So I've got Willie Scobie, Robert McQuiston, Elaine Murray and Dick Brodie. So Willie.
Thanks, Chair. And perhaps if I just quickly go over what I've already said in terms of GIRFEC, and I think as Hugh says, we have about 33% of children, I think that would be fair to say, recorded as needing additional support needs. But, and I'll come to the point in a minute, we don't know just exactly what this, the return of the children in a year out of school will bring in terms of additional support needs. And I think that's caught in 3.4, where it talks about produce a detailed profile of the ASN population. And I think it would be fair to say, Hugh, that we could and will see an increase on the number of children, number of kids who are going to require additional support needs at different levels, 1 to 5, whatever those may be. But nevertheless, we will be required to provide that. I did make the point in 3.4 in terms of what it's saying here, to welcome all those that had been consulted on the action plan. And perhaps Hugh can correct me if I'm wrong, in that I don't see parents being consulted in terms of the action plan. And I think that's imperative that parents are included, in particular parents who have got kids who do need additional support needs, and more so from the profoundly disabled, in terms of how we deliver our courses. I think that, you know, in that respect, and it's more if we are to do, and we are in catch up, in my opinion. I've said we took out 700,000 out of the budget 2 or 3 years ago. We returned because we identified a pressure in about November time of last year, and we put back 340,000 or whatever it is. So we are on catch up in terms of delivering the service to kids who need that additional support need. And the 2 million that's referred to in this document will go nowhere near to what will be needed in terms of the coming out of lockdown and the number of kids, in my opinion, that will need additional support needs. And that 2 million, if we're going to do anything, I think that we should be lobbying much harder. And I'm sure that we are doing it through the official channels. Our officials will be doing it with Scottish government executives and so forth. But I think as members, Chair, we should be doing a lot more to say that that 2 million may not reach the kids who need it. I think I'm saying this in terms of that if we don't do it, then we could be facing a generation of lost kids to education. And in that respect, I think that we should be doing a lot more as elected members in lobbying the Scottish Government to look for much more money out with our settlement to make sure that we don't fail these kids in moving forward. So a number of points there, and it's on the parents, population, and then so that we don't fail the kids, what we are doing as elected members in terms of our lobbying activities.
Thank you.
That should be addressed to you, Chair.
Thank you. John,
can I pick the first two questions up, Councillor Scobie? The query about absolutely disrupted learning, I think that we can say in the last year, all of our children and young people have experienced disrupted learning. In terms of how we support them, you're absolutely right. This is a total response. This is not about an additional learning assistant or an additional ASL, additional support for learning teacher. This is about how we re-gear the whole system to be able to support all of our children, because you're absolutely right in terms of that disrupted learning and that impact. And we know for some, and we've reported before, in terms of that we have seen some increasing challenges for young people that have really struggled at home. But we also have seen, some very interesting feedback from families that have actually found that some of their young people have been able to engage more effectively in learning at home. So I think there are lots of lessons that we can learn from the lockdown and the offer that we provide. In terms of parental engagement, I would, point to the report, which actually highlights in 3. Sorry, I'm scrolling up on my 3.6. which talks about who we need to engage, and it's very clear. And I think actually the action plan from Scottish Government, COSLA and Angela Morgan's report is absolutely clear. We need to do this in partnership with our families. This is no good with us coming up with solutions that don't work. It's absolutely that we need to co-produce those solutions. And the next stage of this process is that absolute engagement with all stakeholders. That includes both our parent forums, but particularly some of those interest groups that with specific and complex needs, families that are supporting those children. So I'd absolutely want to reassure Councillor Scobie that's the plan.
And in terms of funding, Willie, I understand that there is additional money coming from the Scottish Government specifically for additional support needs. I'm not sure how much it is. And I know that certainly from the Children and Young People's Group at COSLA are lobbying for additional funding as well. Okay, so
could I come back on that one, Chair? I'm reassured by Hugh in terms of the co-production of the action plan and the engagement with parents, and I think we've got to make that as broad a spectrum as possible, Hugh, in terms of our engagement with parents and parents who experience the need. In terms of what you say about home tuition, and I'm sure we have learned a lot from the lockdown and home tuition, and if that can be built into some of the additional support needs in terms of kids who are anxious about attending school. So I'm sure that the action plan could also cover that in the curriculum that kids would follow. And again, that would need additional support needs through teacher involvement at home and so forth. So I would hope we would build that in and that's available as an option to parents and children who are anxious in terms of going to school, and that in itself is an additional need. And Jeff, on your point, and I know that's why I made it in terms of COSLA, I don't think that we should just rely on COSLA and others. I think that we need to build in and maybe refer this to our lobbying activities to add to, because education is an important, of massive importance, and that we as members, we should be looking at how much we lobby the Scottish Government in terms of additional funding, and it should be coming out, because if we're announcing we're moving back to school on the 22nd of February, and perhaps a rollout, which we would all welcome in terms of this pandemic, I think we've got to be assured that the money's there for us to offer this service as additional support needs. So I would put it back to you, Jeff, that we need our lobbying activity in this as well.
I think the Scottish Government is probably going to respond more to COSLA as a whole, representing 32 local authorities, than will do from one local authority. I think we're all going to be facing the same possibly massive problems in the future. Okay, Robert McQuiston.
As a clear point of contact for parents, given the wide range of support teachers, etc., is that priority still stand for a named person in order not to confuse parents about who's dealing with what? Thank you.
You?
Sorry, Chair, I missed the beginning of that question, but I think it's with regard to the role of the named person.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. The Scottish Government are absolutely committed to the principles of and the approach of getting it right for every child, and we've adopted that approach here in Dumfries and Galloway of the named person. We are going to be instigating a local review in terms of some of the changes in practice that we've seen nationally around getting it right for every child. But fundamentally, the principles behind getting it right for every child is that there is a point of contact for every child and every family in Dumfries and Galloway, whether that's through the health board or through the council. And that's a principle which is about early intervention, about making sure that we can get the right supports at the right time for families. And I suppose I would be thinking that going forwards, as we recover from the pandemic, that role is going to continue to be crucial. But I'm not sure if your point was in relation to some of the challenges around named person, but I think that we are looking through our GERFEC leadership group to review our processes just to make sure that they're aligned with the most current and up-to-date position, for example, on information sharing.
Yes, thank you, Hugh. It's just given the fact that there are so many practitioners that might be involved in an individual child's life, I think parents might just possibly get confused as to who's in charge. Who do I phone when I phone the school? I want a single person, like a named nurse in the hospital, that I can deal with. And I think it's a critically important point that principle is observed, if only for the sake of parents.
Absolutely, and I think when we move to a more complex planning, the role of the lead professional, which is an individual identified from the team around the child, who then should assume that role, that's critical, because absolutely it's the coordination of, for some of our young people, we've had situations where 4 or 5 different consultants from the health board from different hospitals in Scotland and England have been working and supporting a child. So the coordination of some of the plans for some of our young people are very complex.
Okay, Robert.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you.
Okay. Elaine Murray.
Thanks, Chair. I think the strategic direction is very appropriate. I think it actually ties in well with some of the decisions we've taken through social work in terms of supporting families and early intervention and so on. But I suppose my question relates to something that the Chair said just a few minutes ago. I understood, I know this is about policy, but I understood that there was some additional funding for support for additional learning needs coming from the Scottish Government. But I don't see it referenced in the paper, and I wondered if you had any information as to how much that was, or what has been allocated and how much is Dumfries and Galloway likely to receive from that allocation?
Hugh?
Thank you. I think the timescale sometimes for drafting reports and them being submitted, and I must admit at this point in time I'm not aware of any final sums. We had previously been awarded by Scottish Government as part of a national recognition of some of the pressures, additional funding which has been contributing to for the increase to be able to help us support the increase in demands that we've seen. So I would need to come back to the leader in terms of being able to respond to that question in the detail.
Thank you.
Probably the best thing is if you just email members once you do have further information. Hugh. Okay, and Dick Brodie.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the National Review of Learning Support is welcome. It probably doesn't tell us anything that we didn't know already. We already knew we weren't meeting the needs of these children with additional support needs, and we weren't taking the holistic approach which is now proposed. Also highlighted the effects of austerity on support for learning, because like many authorities, we cut back on learning support. We reduced the numbers of educational psychologists, which are very important to the process. We cut back on support for learning teachers. We did a good thing by reviewing the role of the classroom assistant, make them more effective, but we actually reduced the number of assistants quite substantially. And we've asked classroom teachers to take on a lot more responsibilities, but we haven't provided them with the training. So I'm just asking Hugh for an assurance that all these points are taken on board, that children have got access to educational psychologists, to specialists in things like dyslexia and autism, and that there will be training for teachers, and so that they can meet needs better, but at the same time that they have the support in the classroom where children have got complex needs.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie, and absolutely, I absolutely agree with you. I don't think Angela Morgan has highlighted anything that we haven't probably already discussed at committee over the last few years. This is a real opportunity for us, and that's, I suppose, is the transformational part of this process, is to really look at where have we got our resources and are they delivering the impact and the outcomes that we need. And I wouldn't disagree with your councillor in terms of that there are opportunities to improve that. So I think, in terms of educational psychology, absolutely, as we go forwards, we need to look at what our needs are and whether we have the right resources to be able to meet those needs. And if we need to shift, we need to shift. And I think that's one of the key bits. But coming to your point about teachers, I think that this is absolutely key for us, is that how we can support and build the confidence of all of our teachers to be able to take on that the expectation of inclusion, that the majority of our children should be able to be supported by their class teacher in the school, in the class. That's a piece of work that we know we're at an earlier stage than we probably should be, but it's an absolute priority for us. And again, these are some of the decisions that we need to think about in terms of, well, what are we going to stop doing in the short term to help have the capacity to support class teachers to develop those skills? And are we making sure that as teachers are coming through the pipeline in terms of probationers and coming into the service, that actually they're ready to be able to deliver on the responsibilities for all? So again, I feel very enthused by the report and the action plan from the Scottish Government, because I think it's for the first time an acknowledgement nationally of what every authority in Scotland is dealing with, and that they are looking, in terms of teacher education, in terms of the role of learning assistants, in terms of curriculum for excellence. There's a national working group looking at all of these different factors, which will absolutely help us drive forwards the transformation that we want to deliver in D&G.
Thanks, Hugh. I think that sums up very nicely. I've got David McKee, and no one else after that. So, David.
Thanks, Chair. No, I think it's a really good report, but just listening to what's been said, the last couple of speakers, Hugh and Councillor who down the road, I think the Scottish Government's got to stop and have a look at themselves. They're giving us the responsibility of looking after these children throughout their life, and yet we've been making cuts in the services we provide for them. So I think it's important that the Scottish Government look at themselves and look at the funding required to provide the services that these children require. And to me, just recently, some of the things you've seen on television with disabled youngsters, I don't know if you've seen the wee one with crutches, but you've seen Sir Tom doing what he was doing. And this wee guy, he'd never been out walking or anything, but by God was he belting down the road on his crutches with his artificial legs. And really, governments have got to ensure that we've got funding to support these kind of youngsters. And, well, there's all sorts of disabilities, and we need to address them. But the government can't walk away and cut our funding every year. And we've to stop the services. And we are at the end of the day, we are getting the blame for it. Thanks, Chair. That's my morning finished.
Thank you, David. Well, given that this is a joint review, including the Scottish Government, then hopefully resources will follow. Okay, so can we move to the recommendations on page 87? We've obviously 2.1, consider the outcomes of the national review. 2.2, agree to the incorporation of National Action Plan, the local supporting learners transformational activities as laid out in Appendix 2. And 2.3, agree to receive a further report at the March committee. Everybody happy with that? Okay, thank you. So if we move on to agenda item 10 on page 253. I think you need a larger kitchen table. Gretna Primary School, options to consider following role projections against capacity. To help understand the pressures on school capacity in Gretna, this report shares with members more detailed data around the build-out rates for new properties within the town over the last 20 years and details the historic role changes at the school within the same time scale. And we have Lauren to speak to this. Lauren, is there anything you want to add to the paper?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if I could just take a moment to update some of the figures actually that are in the appendices and in Table 1 on the report. At the point of collecting information through our colleagues in the planning department, we didn't actually have the full figures for last calendar year. So one of the sites that's referenced on Appendix 1, which is GTNH4, it's one of the sites identified in the local development plan as having 85 units. There's actually been 84 units completed now on that site, and I think if members know the Gretna area, that's the site just off the 75 on the way down towards Carlisle. So it is quite a busy site with a lot of development on it, and that had raised alarm bells, which is why we've gone back to planners to say, what about these numbers in there and how can we capture them? So whilst that's not officially returned from the planners themselves, that's on the ground intelligence that we have at this stage there. In terms of impact on the school role, the numbers are the numbers that are in Appendix 2. So in theory, that number of units should have produced 26 more pupils, and in theory we would have seen the school role grow, but actually it's still quite static at the numbers that are inside the appendix. So it was just to point that out. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. Members, I've got Karen Carruthers. Karen?
Hi, sorry, Chair. Yes, hi, Lauren. Thanks for this report. Obviously, I have brought this up to our attention in the first instance, just due to concerns that constituents have brought to myself and the Community Council. The other thing that's actually going through plan at the moment is 200 plus houses, and that is going through the planning process. So, you know, that is continuing on. So for me, Lauren, I would like to see this kept on the horizon. I don't want this like kind of kicked into the long grass and we return to this like in about 3 or 4 years' time, because there is, I know that COVID at the moment has happened, and I know that obviously that takes priority, But as things start to return to normal, I think that it is important that we keep our eye on the ball here. As I say, there is currently 200 plus houses going through the planning process, and if that comes off, then we've no idea just what the pressures that's going to put on the school. But the one thing we do know is the predicted figures from the last time, it actually ended up that there was more kids attending the school. So, you know, as much as I think at this moment in time, you know, it's difficult to assess where we are, I would like to see this kept in our sights. I would like a report brought back in the next 6 months, just so as we can see where we are with COVID, see where we are with the development that's actually currently going through the planning process, and just to keep an eye on it, because I think it is a really important topic, and I don't want it to get to the point where, you know, we're running in the back foot when it's already been brought to our attention. So I would like something just brought back in 6 months to kind of review where we are, as I say, because of the 200 plus houses that are currently going through planning process.
Thanks, Karen. In the recommendations 2.2, it says to agree a future report. What sort of timescale do you think? I mean, obviously you said 6 months. It talks about trigger points.
If I may, Chair, I think the vital thing on this is that we don't lose sight, exactly that, we don't lose sight of what's happening in Gretna. And actually 6 months' time might be too late to take an action point. I think from my perspective, what we would want to do with these trigger points is bring that back to the next opportunity to present to members to say, if the school roll is projected to grow by X, this is the step that we take. Now, when we put that into play, doesn't matter as such, as long as we've got that agreed through the committee process, and that allows us to react in terms of growth within the Gretna area, whether it's through the site that's identified for the 200, which is the mixed use site, or whether it's any of the others. If they accelerate or work starts growing there and starts producing the units and potentially the children, we've then got an opportunity to act on that. Realistically, the trigger points will be layered. The first trigger points might be that we have to look to grow the capacity of the school in a temporary nature, so that we can see how the other developments settle out over time. And that might be a temporary solution for a short period of time that then moves to a permanent solution and an extension to the school. Or it might actually be, if the 200 odd children that we are, which could be anticipated through this, come along, it might be a completely new school or knock down and start again. So by having the trigger points and the solutions to those trigger points laid out and presented to members, we've got that in the background, so that when the development does actually happen, we're able to respond with the right one.
Chair, is it okay to come? Yep. Yeah, thank you, Chair. That's great to hear, Lauren. So it is. So in that case, I think that the next report that comes in front of us would be good to have identified what are the trigger points and kind of offer timeline. So are you talking the next report being the next couple of months, 2-3 months? What's your estimated time?
I think that's fine for us here. I mean, we can work up the trigger points from a desktop perspective, because it's not actually putting the physical solution in place. So we're just looking at, if, for example, the school roll grows by 20 pupils, at that point we know we've got a pressure, so we have to do something. If the school roll grows by 60 pupils, that's a different solution. If it grows by 100, etc. It's just to put those in and then work backwards from what the solution has to be. By example, bringing in a temporary solution is something that we can mobilise relatively quickly. But if it's to the extent of building a new school, we need to work backwards from maybe a 3-year programme where we've got to be able to secure the funding, do all the design work, all the planning process, and actually physically get it built. So the triggers will grow in scale, as will the solutions. It's just how far down that process we go will be dependent on the number of units and number of children that they produce.
So are we talking about bringing a further report back? I haven't got my diary in front of me for the June or July meeting.
That would be acceptable from our perspective. We've got time to be able to pull all that information together.
Right. Happy with that, Karen?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. I feel reassured. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So I don't seem to have anybody else looking to speak. So can we move to the recommendations? 2.1, we've noted the information is detailed in appendices 1 and 2 about the build-out rates and economic position. And 2.2, agree a future report be brought back to the members around trigger points, and that will be, as I say, I've got my diary, so either the June or July meeting, whichever is the meeting around about that sort of time scale. Happy with that?
Agreed. Yep,
okay.
Thank you.
Okay. We're pleased to hear I haven't got any more business, so thank you everyone for your attendance, and it went a lot better than I expected, I must say. So thanks very much and stay safe.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.